If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedman.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today, my special guest is Corey Poirier. Corey is a multiple-time TEDx speaker and was recently announced as one of just 15 Success Magazine Emerging Entrepreneurs, which is a first-time award. He's also the host of the top-rated Let's Do Influencing radio show, founder of the growing Blue Talks brand, and has been featured in multiple television specials. He's a Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Apple Books, and Kobo best-selling author, award-winning author, and co-author of the Wall Street Journal USA Today bestseller, Quitless: The Power of Persistence in Business and Life. Corey, what an absolute pleasure it is to welcome you to the show, and thank you for being this week's guest expert and mentor.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so super happy and stoked to be here.
I'm super stoked to have you. I've had a chance to look at some of the incredible people who you've interviewed on your show, some of the greats. Bob Proctor, I was like, he is no more, but you had an incredible opportunity to speak with him and many other great people. I know that building credibility and influence is something that you're pretty good at. So let's start off there and let's talk about that and give us your secret number one way of building credibility and influence.
Honestly, it kind of starts where your question was winding down in terms of the interviews that I've done with thought leaders and high achievers. It was never meant to be a take thing. It was always meant to be giving. But that has probably been one of the biggest, I think, leverage points I've had as an influencer. And the biggest way I was able to be positioned as an influencer is by the people that I've surrounded myself and the people I've learned from and the minds that I've picked, for lack of a better word. I've been blessed to be able to spend time with so many thought leaders, but also, being able to have those on video interviews and pictures with those thought leaders and conversations with them. Honestly, I think that's what really helped position me as, if we want to use the term influencer, or position me to help influence more people.
Often I get asked, how do you make contact with people? People are often scared to make contact with the high flyers in the world. What's your trick?
I'll say it this way. There's not one specific trick, I'll call it, but I will say that it's not one specific thing, but it's a lot of little things. And at the same time, it's also stuff that's not really even strategic. And so I'll kind of mix the two. But as far as strategy, when I first started, how I guess we'll say I started the process, one of my first big ones was Jack Canfield from Chicken Soup. When I reached out to his team, they basically said it was probably going to be a no because he didn't have anything that he was promoting at the time. He wasn't doing many interviews and he was turning down 9 out of every 10 interviews. It started out as a no. And I thought, well, it's only a no for now. Let's figure out how to make it a yes. The strategy I used is I went to Jack's site and I looked at who was providing endorsements to him. And I thought, if people are endorsing him, then he probably respects them. I found this guy named Dan Sullivan, and Dan Sullivan runs a thing called Strategic Coach. I thought, well, maybe I'll try to see if I can reach Dan. Make a long story short, I was able to get an interview with Dan, and we talked about Jack in the interview, which I expect would happen. And then he said the magic words, you know what? Jack would love the show. You should get him on for an interview. And he said, and by the way, tell him I said so. I took that clip. I knew also that Jack and Mark Victor Hansen both had went to Dan's retreats and events and paid him almost as their coach. So I clipped that audio and I sent it to Jack's team. And I said, even Dan, Jack's coach, thinks Jack should be on my show. And they reply back like really quickly. I say within an hour, and they said, "You've beaten us into submission, Corey. Here's the link to schedule your interview with Jack." That's very much a strategy that I used. And it was based on the idea of people like people they know, like, and trust, but they also like people that know people they know. And so it's almost like I was vetted by Dan. So that made Jack's team trust me and willing to schedule an interview. So that's more of a strategic. Another strategic that people can do is the best time to get on a big name influencer is when they have a book coming out. They're most apt to jump on and do an interview. What you can also do is Amazon has this great thing called coming soon for books, and you can go back quite a ways. And so what I would say is the bigger the name, the further you want to go back. But if they've listed that they have a book coming out in a year's time, then you can start now and build a relationship. And they're going to be most apt earlier on to accept an interview, even a big name, because they haven't lined up their whole media tour for the book yet. If it's 3 months out and it's Matthew McConaughey, you've already waited too long. But that coming soon allows you to see who has books coming out and who's most likely to do interviews. So that's another strategy. But then if I go to the other side, Susan, in terms of non-strategy, and it's just a happy accident that this happened, is I literally went into these relationships trying to figure out how I could keep depositing over and over and over again, like how I could deposit as many times as possible without ever withdrawing in the relationship. So what I mean by that is I really wanted to give before I ever asked, which is Gary Vee has a book called Jab, 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 Right Hook. And that's the premise is give before you ever ask. And I didn't read the book and do it because of that, but that's what I essentially did is I kept giving to influencers without ever asking. And then when I finally decided to make my one ask, it was almost like, well, gosh, you've been doing everything you could to support us. Of course I have to say yes. And so that's not really a strategy or tactic, but that would be the other thing that's really helped. And then influencers typically hang around with influencers. So being able to talk to an influencer and say, hey, who else do you think I could promote on my show and give some exposure to? And usually they'll be more than happy to connect you with somebody else that's in their circle of influence if you're going to be giving to them and they know you gave to the original person without expecting to receive. So those are some strategies, and I'll say soft strategies all combined into one.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, my goodness. I mean, just those few minutes, listeners, you got to re-listen to that, just that part. If you just did one or two of those suggestions, I love the coming soon piece. I think that's so powerful. And then, as you said, the giving first. I mean, that's the whole concept of reciprocity, that you give and then somebody feels, oh, well, yes, maybe I should give back. Even if it's subconscious, is that feeling of, well, you've given so much to me, let me now give back to you as a way of my saying thank you to you and being on your show. And I've had that with a few influencers myself. In fact, funnily enough, I was just speaking to somebody about Mark Schaefer. I've been reading his books. I love him. And I was like, oh, I'd love to get him on my show. And I just mentioned that to this person and she said, oh my goodness, he's a good friend of mine. Let me introduce you. Then I get an email from Mark saying, anybody who's a friend of Mary is a friend of mine. That was just like instant. So what you're saying is right on the money and I don't know, priceless as far as I'm concerned. So thank you for that. You and I were talking a little bit before the show about the idea of book sales, bulk book sales, sustaining book sales. And I know that's something, you're an author and you know how to sell books. So what are some of the ways in which you keep your book up front and center in people's minds?
I love the last part of that question because how do you keep it front and center is so important, because what I find most people do, and this is like you said, after a lot of years in the business of books, I find too many people launch a book and then clap their hands together and say, okay, I'm done. Became a bestseller. If that's what their goal was on Amazon, I'm done. And to me, like a book can be the gift that keeps on giving, and it should have a life long after that first little 1 month launch period. And, I think of books that have impacted my life. Like I'm looking at my shelf right now and books like the Celestine Prophecy, which, sold close to 40 million copies. And I don't know how many it sold this year, but it's still selling probably thousands of copies this year. Like to me, why wouldn't you want your book to be continually, I'll say, relevant? And so I don't actually get the idea of launching a book and then moving on. My last book, The Book of Why, previous to the new one I have coming out. It's 4 years since it was published with a traditional publisher, 2 years before that as a self-published book, and it took 4 years to write. And so it's 10 years. And I still talk about it on a weekly, at least, basis. And it still sells copies. So, I mean, that's a great question, is what I'm getting at. And so for me, how do you kind of stay relevant and still sell books? And we go into the bigger picture of how do you sell books in the first place? I think one of the things you can do is keep relaunching your book. So again, I feel people think the only time to put a book out is whenever it's new to you, and then launch it for a month and then move on. Whereas I think there's a reason why the big books, you see, they have like a 15-year anniversary, a 20-year anniversary. I mentioned Jack Canfield earlier. I know he did a 20-year anniversary of the Success Principles, and he went on all the shows, and basically it was like a whole new launch again. But this is a book that hasn't really changed a whole lot. I would say the first thing to do is always be thinking of how can I continually relaunch? And relaunching could be every quarter. You might not go through the whole same big launch you went through, but it might mean that you have a couple strategies. Like, for example, maybe you tie book sales into an event you do and say, access to the event, you just have to buy 3 books instead of charging for the event. And then that spikes your book a little bit again. There's so many ways that you can, like I say, relaunch, or whatever term we want to put on it, a book over and over again, that I think it's sad when I see so many people just launch it and forget it. On the bulk side of things, one of the things we did early on with a book series I had called Conversations With is we profiled different local business leaders. What we did for bulk sales, which worked really well, is either people that were profiled in the book, we approached them, and a lot of them had like maybe 400 or 500 employees. So we approached them about purchasing copies for their employees. Also, if they have waiting rooms, purchasing copies for their waiting room. Also purchasing copies for gifts. And a really big one was client gifts. So now you're sending your client for whatever it cost, $10, let's say at that time. You're sending your client a gift for $10, a client that could be spending thousands a year with you. And then they're seeing you positioned as the expert whenever. And you could even, if it's a co-author book and you have one section in the book, you could put something at that part to say, hey, there's where my section starts. This is something I know we talked about. I thought you might like to check this out. I mentioned it here, or what have you. But bulk sales, that's a huge one. And I think it's mostly thinking of how can the person that you're trying to sell the bulk books to use those books in a way that benefits them.
Yes, I mean, I sold 500,000 copies of my first book, and that was to one company. And what they did was literally give it away to both prospects and clients. Yeah, I mean, they had a use for it. It was serving a purpose with tips and techniques, and they loved it. The response was amazing, so much so that they reordered. So I know that one. It's a brilliant strategy. I love the idea of relaunching the book. I'd love to go down that avenue a little bit more, Corey, with you. I've had questions that people say to me, well, how long should I keep marketing my book? And my question is, how long do you want to keep selling it? It's like the two go hand in glove. But the relaunching, what do you need to do? Do you have to have a new cover? Do you have to have a new title? Or is it the exact same book that you're finding another angle to put it out there?
I think it can be both, or either or. So as far as the cover side, I think it can be the same cover. One thing you can do, and you got to remember there's a diminishing return probably on this, is like, for example, with the copyright date, I mean, you may want to add a couple of new things and then put a new copyright date on it, because ultimately, if you want it to appear like a fresh book, the benefit of that is, typically speaking, I've heard this from a lot of media, they're usually most interested in a book 4 months before it's published, while it's published, and 4 months after. So you have like kind of an 8-month window. And so when you're relaunching, if they open the book and it says 1997, then chances are they're not going to see that as a fresh book. And so I might change the copyright. Again, I would add something new so it's authentic, but it could be just the smallest thing, like a new forward or something. But as far as the cover, it would depend on how well the cover performed. If it's a cover that's knocking it out of the park, I don't think I would mess with that. If I felt sales were soft on the first launch, I might mess with the cover a bit. If I did that, I would probably go out, and this is another way to relaunch. I would go to people that are in my network and say, hey guys, what do you think of these covers? And present 4 or 5 options and help them take ownership in the book by picking the cover they like the most. I would say, you could have a new cover, you don't have to. And you could have a new angle as well. So if you have 12 chapters in a book, Like, for example, the new book that we have that's it's truly just dropped is called The Enlightened Passenger. It's a bit different. It's a fictional parable, but it's still like a self-help book. And it's very much similar to a nonfiction book in a lot of ways. And so with that book, in terms of how we released it and what we're doing with that, ultimately we put the cover out and we got people to give feedback. We sent out the manuscript to people to get them to provide feedback, like beta readers, basically. And so we have a lot of things that we did the first time around that we could redo, because what I find is you always are bringing, well, you should be always bringing new people into your market. If you have a show like we do, so if I have a podcast and I have 40 guests on that year, that's 40 new people with their whole networks that I can now introduce my book to who didn't know about it when I did the previous launch. One of the other things that we did do twice with this Book of Why before we even brought it to a publisher is we crowdfunded it twice. So we launched it on Kickstarter. We did about 11,000 or 12,000 in sales in about 2.5, 3 weeks. And then we did a relaunch a year later and did about 10,000. So almost the same a year later. My network was still the same network, but I had added all these new people in that time since, which is why it still did well. It was new buyers, different people a year later. If that happened, and that's, it was a very focused launch and we only had a short amount of time. But if I was able to do that in a couple of weeks, just with a year apart, it tells you how many people we're potentially adding to our network that don't know about our book. Again, you could launch it as if the people that already know about it, can say, I love it. They might write reviews. You can do that as part of your launch. But the new people, they didn't see that launch. So it's all fresh to them. It's almost like if you went on social media, would you only put one post ever because people might have seen it? You put it out again because new people are discovering it all the time. But then also as part of that, and this could be ongoing, I would have it on my email signature. Check out my book, The Book of Why or whatever, and click here to grab your copy today, because new people are seeing my email signature. On my podcast, if I wanted to relaunch, then I would maybe start teasing that earlier on before I do the relaunch. I have an email newsletter that has around 30,000 people. And we're adding, we added 500 people like a few days ago. And so that's 500 new people that didn't know about even this launch that I'm doing with the Enlightened Passenger, because the book is just coming out and they came on after we've already teased it out. So, I know I'm jumping around a bit there, Susan, but to me, what I'm talking about there is ongoing launch. And then also the ability to relaunch, like I said, with what I did with the crowdfunder. And to that point, if you didn't like the cover, it didn't perform, to circle back, I would say look at a new cover, get feedback. If you like the cover, it performed really well, then just relaunch with the same cover. But I would freshen the copyright up. And to me, to authentically do that, I would put something new. It could be an afterword. Maybe you got an endorsement after the book was out, a really big name endorsement. Maybe you add that to the front cover. To me, that's enough to, now the book has a new element. Now it's a new copyright. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Oh, very much so. And are you still keeping the same title of the book? It's just the same title, but just with a new look and feel.
Yes, same title. And again, I want to really clarify, as you know, it's hard enough to get a title that works and that resonates with people. So if I strike on a title that people talk about a lot, then I don't want to change that or mess with it. So like the Book of Why and How, we ran into a snag with that because there was another Book of Why out. There was a couple of books. There was obviously Simon Sinek's Start With Why, but there was an actual book called The Book of Why, and ours was called The Book of Why and How. There would be the temptation to change that, but my thinking around that side is ours came out first, and you could always find another book potentially with the same title, and are you going to change it forever? For me, I made the decision that we would keep the same title and make sure our subtitle was a bit different, and the how part, we actually use that to our advantage. We talked about, there's a lot of people that talk about the why, but we're also talking about the how. So we use that as part of our unique proposition, let's say. The Enlightened Passenger, again, newest book, so many people that we talk to about it, they go, oh, how's the Enlightened Passenger coming along? So like the title, I know it resonated because, first of all, people are pretty honest with me. So I've done stuff where it's a title and they're like, oh, I don't like that title. And this one here, people are, and even when we did the feedback with beta readers, they all were like, and one thing I really dig is the title. For me, I don't think I would change the title. And here's the only maybe exception for me to that rule is Michael Gerber wrote the book called The E-Myth, and then he wrote The E-Myth Revisited. And The E-Myth Revisited, actually, I think is considered the main book now, and I think sold more copies. But the takeaway from there is I could call it The Enlightened Passenger Revisited. If I added maybe a chapter or something, I might do that. But if, again, it all goes back to if the title's working, I don't mess with it.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I love that. And then I would say that you would put another ISBN number so that people would be able to distinguish which one, especially when you're selling it on Amazon or in bookstores, that you're getting the right version, correct?
Like if it was an updated, revised version, absolutely. Because again, not everybody will agree with the idea of even changing the copyright. So if they change nothing about the book, maybe they say, you know what, the book's working, I'm not going to change it at all. Then they would probably want to leave it the same, because then on Amazon, it's just that one place. Like when you search Amazon, there's not two to choose from. But if you have a revised version, like I said, Jack Canfield had the 20th edition of the Success Principles. So if you go on and search the Success Principles, you're probably going to find one version, which was the original that you can still buy, and then one version, which is the updated edition for the 21st century or whatever it says on it. And that's going to be a different version. And of course, that one has new elements that you may want to get those new elements, or you may want the original. So Think and Grow Rich is a great example. I don't remember where it's at to see what it says in the cover, but I have I'll call it an updated version of Think and Grow Rich that has stories about like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Martha Stewart and stuff like that. Obviously, that wasn't in the 1937 edition. Well, some people would want those new stories because it's modern and they can see how that could relate to them. And maybe they know Arnold's story better than they know Thomas Edison's, or even a person, Edward Burns, that people don't even know. At the same time, some people might say, I want the original Think and Grow Rich. I don't want this new stuff. I want it exactly as Napoleon Hill wrote it. So I think in that case, you probably want it, like you said, have a new ISBN and everything, because you're wanting new people to discover it for the first time.
Yeah. Wow. So much stuff here. I'm just itching to ask you about the crowdfunding, but you know what? I'm going to have you back to talk about that, if that's something that you would be willing to do, because I feel we could have a whole episode just about you talking about crowdfunding, because I've made the suggestion to authors about crowdfunding, but actually, what it takes to do it, and successfully, obviously, is something that I'm sure our listeners would get so much benefit from. So if you're willing to do that, Corey, maybe we could have you back.
The short answer is absolutely. And I know it is one of those areas where not a lot of people, even now, it's still not a common thing. And when I did it on Kickstarter, to be quite honest, Susan, I only knew one person that had done any form of a book crowdfund at that time. Now, this is going back 5 years, but it was John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneurs on Fire. And he launched his Freedom Journal using Kickstarter. It wasn't a traditional book. It was like a journal, but it was what triggered the idea for me. Why can't I do a traditional book that way? And I will say, when I did it, I ended up doing, and I haven't done one in a while, so it'd be cool because it'd be fresh and new. But I remember at the time, Forbes Books reached out to me. Chandler Bolt reached out and said, we want to get you on the show, talk about crowdfunding, because not many people are doing this. So yeah, it's something that still a lot of people I don't feel are doing. And there's a whole world there to explore.
Absolutely. And there's money available, when authors are having a hard time, because when you're doing this on your own, you're footing the bill for everything. And it starts adding up very quickly between the editing and book cover and the publishing. And obviously, if you're working with a book coach in the beginning, all of this. And then there's the marketing. That's often what people forget, as you said. Once they've finished the book, it's like, okay, I've done that. But that's really just the beginning of the journey. So yes, I think that would be enormously valuable. Corey, this is a great segue into you sharing with our listeners how they can find out more about you and your brilliance and what you do, and how potentially you might be able to help them.
Yeah, there's probably two avenues around that side. So one avenue is we have the new book, as I mentioned, coming out. It's literally the website for the book is being finalized. I know podcasts are evergreen, so I'll just say today. So that means anybody listening to it in 24 hours from now, meaning almost everybody, it'll be live. But essentially, that's the website where you can go and get it. And we still send you to retailers, so you don't have to buy it from us. But what we do then is you come back and put the order number in, and then you can actually get the free bonuses that you won't get if you get it through the retailers on its own. On that side, if people want to check out this new book I mentioned, it's called thisisthebook.com is the website. So thisisthebook.com. And again, it's a fictional book, but it's a parable. It's loosely based on my life and the interviews I've done with so many thought leaders. It's so far, I feel blessed. It's being released by Morgan James Publishing. And the foreword was written by Richard Paul Evans, who's like a 46 times New York Times bestselling author. And then it's been endorsed by James Redfield from Celestine Prophecy, Mark Victor Hansen from Chicken Soup, Lisa Nichols from The Secret, and many others. I feel like the book really, it's ready to meet the world. And so feel free to grab the book. And again, there's lots of free bonuses there. And then the other option would be if people, we didn't talk about it at all today, really, but if people want to share their expertise, let's say on a stage on various platforms, we have a brand called Blue Talks. Blue stands for Business Life Universe. And basically, it's almost like TEDx meets Chicken Soup for the Soul. And we bring our live events to places like Columbia, Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, what have you. And what we ultimately end up doing is showcasing people's expertise on those powerful stages, and then ultimately get some marketing assets like video and stuff that they can leverage and use for the rest of their life.
So is that sort of similar to the TEDx?
Yeah, it's similar. The difference would be, I think that our core focus is on the expert first and then the audience, whereas TEDx is on the audience first. Our focus is on helping that expert reach a new audience, reach people, build their, I'll call it platforms up, build their portfolio up. When you go to their website after they've worked with us, you can watch a video of them speaking at an epic place and seen on banner of them being featured on Apple and Roku and Amazon and Google Play. Flyer that maybe say they co-authored a book with Dr. Joe Vitale or shared the virtual bill with Les Brown or Lisa Nichols. Those are things that took me 15 years. And we see our clients get those things on their website in 2 or 3 months. And it's all legit. Like they did the work, we did the work, and it all happened. So it's similar in terms of if you come to the live event, and it is a live event, it would feel similar to a TEDx style event. The one difference is we do a more live interviews. So almost like podcast interviews in front of an audience. And then the other difference is we're really focused on the back end of helping that expert get their message out to more people.
Beautiful. Yes, you and I need to talk more about that because I'm sure that's something that I can make available to our authors. And I believe you have a free gift for our listeners.
Yeah, since we've been talking about books today and I've went back and forth on both books, the book of Why and How, I'll say is out of the 2 books, it's my original baby. We call these books our babies sometimes. It's the original baby. And basically, the concept of the book is to help you discover what your meaning and your why and your purpose. But the book's not only that, it's also what do you do once you find it. And so it's broken down into 3 sections. And basically, the first one is finding your why. And it's all about how to do that. The second one is how to thrive once you do. And the third one is how to do it in an enlightened way so that you're helping others. And then the back of the book has like 1,400 quotes by thought leaders. And so the book itself is, again, essentially to help people find meaning in their life. And we also released an audio version of the book. And so what I want to give away to your guests is the free audio version of the book. It's easy to get it. You literally just have to go to thebookofpublicspeaking.com. So thebookofpublicspeaking.com or thebookofwhyaudio.com. Either of those will take you there.
Perfect. And I'll put all of those links in the show notes, Corey, for everyone. And I know you have shared so much wisdom already. However, you know that we like to end off with our guests leaving a golden nugget, the sort of words of wisdom. What are yours?
I think my parting words would be to find a way every day to live on purpose. And if you haven't found that meaning or purpose now, honestly, it sounds bold to say, but whatever it takes to get there, you need to do it because it changes everything in your life. I call it taking vitamin P, and P is for either passion or purpose, you pick. And I do think they're different things. Passion is what you do, like whatever it is, writing a book, comedy, music, photography. Purpose is why you're actually doing it. But I link them both together and call them vitamin P. And I say it's the one vitamin you can't buy in the stores and the most important one you ever take. And it's what changed everything in my life. If somebody's listening to this and they found their purpose, I would just say live every day as much as possible in that purpose. If you haven't found it, trust me, it's worth anything it takes to find it. And I guess without even thinking of a cheap plug, I will say I offered the audiobook, and the audiobook that I offered for free will actually tell you the exercises around how to do that.
Wonderful. That's even better reason to listen to it. I can't wait. So thank you. This has been amazing, Corey. And as I said, if you're open to it, love to have you come back and we'll really dig deep into relaunching the book or even launching the book and crowdfunding, getting some funds for that, whether it's Kickstarter, any of the other sites. And I think there are some that are more book friendly than others these days. So we'll talk more about that. So again, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And by the way, listeners, if your book isn't selling the way you wanted or expected to, Let's you and I jump on a quick call together to brainstorm ways to ramp up those sales, because you've invested a whole lot of time, money, and energy, and it's time you got the return you were hoping for. Go to brainstormwithsusan.com to schedule your free call. In the meantime, I hope this powerful interview sparks some ideas you can use to sell more books. Until next week, here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.